Okay. Good evening again.
Well, we're not going to do that tonight.
Welcome to the regular meeting of the Short-Term Rental Committee. I'm calling the meeting to order. We have said the pledge, so there's no need to repeat it. And at this time, I'd like to ask if there are any public delegations, anyone wanting to comment on anything that's on our agenda for the evening. Feel free to come on up.
It's not appropriate for a member of the commission to speak at the public delegation, is it?
Not usually.
Paul says no. Okay.
Yes, right. You'd have to, it's
okay,
more
right.
complicated. Okay. All right, so we're on to item number 3 on the agenda, approval of minutes of the regular meeting of January 16th, 2024. Do I hear a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Okay, Gary made the motion, and second? Anyone seconding it?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay, Greg will second. And any changes, corrections, comments on the minutes? Anybody have anything? Okay, we're all set. Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes of January 16th signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any
I abstain.
abstain? Okay, John will abstain as he was excused from the last meeting. Okay. All right. The next item on the agenda is item 4, reports or updates, if any, from our zoning official, building official, fire marshal, or police chief. So I am not seeing them in the audience. I have received some communications. I actually did receive, Dave Garside, I believe, is still out of town. Fire Marshal Bundy had nothing new to add and emailed me that.
Can I,
Yes, go
with
ahead.
respect to that, can I ask Gary to reiterate his conversation with the fire marshal about the safety inspections?
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, just hang on one second. We'll come right back to that. No problem. And Bill Mulholland, same situation at this point. He did email me, nothing new right there. And I hadn't heard yet from Chief Mike. But they're always available if we have questions. That's basically how we've been communicating, is question by question and directly to them. But they've been a great resource, especially at the beginning of this process, to get us on good footing with some solid information. So yes, go right ahead, Gary, if you'd like to elaborate on what you've learned from Fire Marshal Bundy.
So this is largely a repeat of what I said at the last meeting, but I sat with Fire Marshal Bundy specifically to talk about safety inspections and what kind of a bureaucratic burden that would be on his department. And he came down strongly in favor of having a regulation or ordinance that had a safety inspection aspect to it. He said that his department conducts hundreds of them over the course of the year, and we don't have a solid estimate of how many STRs are in town, although Greg did some research on Airbnb and VRBO, and I think he came up with like 175, 180, something like that.
Yeah.
Fire Marshal Bundy said that he would like to be able to get in there on an annual basis. He said the cost that the town charges for a typical house of under 3,000 square feet is $65. And he said the inspection usually takes about 15 minutes. They look for working smoke detectors. They look for entrances and exits to make sure that they're clean. They look for overloaded wiring, just a general safety check. So he said, not only did he say that his department could handle it, but that he was strongly encouraging us to include that if we recommend any regulations or an ordinance.
Okay.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks,
Gary.
yeah, that's very helpful. and we had started to talk about that a bit last meeting when you and Greg, went through the permitting process outline that you provided.
Okay.
So that's good information to know, because as we've all we all agree, I believe, that anything that we do propose and that we agree upon, that we forward to Board of Selectmen, and should they agree, it has to be enforceable and workable and not particularly expensive. So that's good information. Okay. Okay, so we're done with item 4. We're going right through this agenda here. Okay, and so we're now to the meaty part, I guess, which is item number 5, which is discussion and possible action on regulation under consideration. So as we begin to return to our conversation of our last meeting and kind of pick up where we left off, I would like to take a moment, if I could, before we get there, to comment, just to go through if anyone has any comments on what you heard this evening, thoughts, opinions, information that you feel bear on our work here. So begin with anyone, doesn't matter, I don't have to go.
I would like to follow up on something that Paul mentioned the last time.
Okay.
We do in East Lyme have regulations on bed and breakfasts, and apparently we have regulations on long-term rentals that I was not aware of when you mentioned last time that you're required to submit some paperwork every year on your rental. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to, as opposed to just throwing some new recommendations out there, that maybe we can take in what we have as a starting place and maybe expand on that a little bit, and recommend to the Board of Selectmen that, we don't necessarily do something brand new, but that we expand on the regulations that we have at this point, be it on the bed and breakfast or be it on long-term rentals or both. And I think we also need to decide, are we going to recommend a regulation that is a kind of a pan recommendation across all rentals, and bed and breakfasts, or are we going to try to piecemeal short-term rentals?
Well, definitely we need to understand what regulation we have already. I mean, for sure, with respect to our existing zoning, and I'm sure can speak to this, but we do have a section on bed and breakfasts, and they are actually, as Paul mentioned last time, they are allowed in 2 residential zones, but there are pretty significant restrictions on them. As I recall, first of all, they need to be owner occupied, or I believe, if not owner occupied, host operated, whatever. And there are size restrictions. There's limitations on the number of units. I remember reading about fencing and shrubbery and a number of things to screen them, parking requirements, etc. So, and that whole process happens by way of special permit. So sure, and I believe Attorney Londrigan was highlighting something that we've been talking about with, let's say, noise ordinance and parking ordinance. We're very well aware of those things on the books. We just received, I think it's right by where you're sitting this evening, Brooke provided us with a memo from Diane, our assessor, and let's take a look at that, because this is, again, presuming this is policy, I'm just going to read this. We just read it, right? It's very brief. To commission members. If property owners are renting their houses out as short-term rental, then they are engaged in business activity in town and are required to file a personal property declaration with the assessor's office by November 1st. All furnishings supplied to rent the house would be taxable, such as the furniture, linens, dishes, etc. If there is a registration process, meaning we recommend that and Board of Selectmen choose to do that, the information should be provided to the assessor's office so that we can properly add them to the tax rolls. So there you have
That's what I was talking
certainly
Oh, is it? Okay.
an opinion there, and yeah, so definitely we similarly we are very well aware. I know Attorney Lonergan discussed this point, but as a board, we're very well aware of existing zoning in the 3 beach communities and what is specified, if anything, about short-term rentals. So we know, for example, in Black Point Beach community, short-term rentals are allowed 7 days and beyond, correct? Yes, it's a 7-day, the 7-day rule, we'll call it. But and that, yeah, and those are very up-to-date zoning regulations, by the way. They were as of December 1st, John, I believe that's your community.
That's correct.
They were updated, and that short-term rental definition is there, and it's a permitted use in the residential zone of your beach community as well as the commercial zone, the commercial district. But as far as the other 2 beaches with, which is Giant's Neck, we have, there isn't really, I could not find a reference, and correct me if I'm wrong, in Paul, Giant's Neck Beach, I couldn't find a reference to short-term rentals or a definition of a short-term rental in those regulations. So,
The zoning regulations, Madam Chairman, in Giants Neck Beach are silent on short-term rentals, and there are some noise things, but I did mention at the last meeting, if I may, and everyone knows I am a
yes,
owner of a short-term rental, but I'm also owner of a long-term rental. And actually I have more problems with long-term rentals than I do with short-term rentals. But I did look through the zoning regulations last time, and I spoke at this at the last meeting. I'm glad Mr. Peck is here because he and I served on that commission a while ago together. But I didn't notice any conversation, or I thought the regulations of zoning, East Lyme zoning regulations were silent on long-term rentals. I don't think they're mentioned in the zoning regulations for the town of East Lyme.
right,
There are mentioned of 2-family houses being allowed and other such.
I agree.
But it seemed silent when I looked at it very quickly, and I may have missed something. So my comment as we begin this conversation is listening to Attorney Londrigan talk about his recommendation for any of our recommendations be tailored to an ordinance and not a zoning regulation. I think there has to be both. I think we have to do some recognition in the zoning regulations with regard to both short-term and long-term rentals, if that's what we're going to allow, and we have to. I think the Supreme Court is looking at the issue of those 2 different uses being treated separately and differently, where they should be perhaps treated the same. So I think that as we look forward into a lot of these things, that we can do that with the noise ordinance. We can do it with any parking situation. We can. So I think that there's a lot of work for other boards and commissions from our recommendations, and we are going to also be at Giants Neck Beach Association. Its current president, which is why I'm represented on this board, and I understand the question about conflict of interest, but sometimes having an opportunity for discussion with people that are knowledgeable of the issue and work in the issue all the time can serve on an ad hoc committee where no regulations or rules are going to be established other than recommendations to the committee. So I feel we're having a good discussion here, and I think that the input from the public tonight in answer to your question was similar to what we've heard all along. There are people that are for, there are people who are concerned, and there are people who are against. And I think that's the wonder of government. You have the opportunity to address all of those. And, that's why people speak with each other. They used to. They may not speak with each other as much as they used to, but so we can find some common grounds to do it. And I think we're on the right path in a lot of these conversations we're talking about with regard to registrations and knowledge and perhaps some inspections, depending on if the town is capable of that.
Good points, Paul. So, for example, I think in some information that Mr. Mulholland has given us, and I think, Greg, you've mentioned this about the Simsbury ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked at that Simsbury ordinance, which is very good because it's streamlined. It's not exhaustive. I enjoyed looking at that. It wasn't overkill, over-regulation, I think. But obviously tailored to their particular needs. But the key point is that you have to go back and look at the zoning in Simsbury. So I said to myself, do they allow in Simsbury, by way of zoning, short-term rentals? And they do. So there is this, marriage of the two processes, if you will, of, correcting your zoning as needed, and then, bolstering some regulatory process or permitting process by a simple ordinance. Because the truth of the matter is, if you were just to do an ordinance, then and say, here's what we're doing, then you are saying that our zoning regulations allow short-term rentals. Or those other beach communities that do not have their own zoning and that are silent on the topic also allow them. So these are, to me, quantum leaps, and I've made this point a couple of times, and I'll make it again, maybe 3 times the charm. That I think we need to respect zoning as the way we determined land use. And I find it difficult to think that we can just, with one fell swoop with an ordinance, cover everything. And if you start looking at some of the zoning regulation amendments, like in up at Noank, there's a whole set of them that didn't pass only because the community came out and said, we want long-term rentals, meaning over 30 days. It's not long, but it's anything over 30. But before that happened, there was actually a drafting, very detailed drafting of zoning regulation changes. So if you look at those, all of these, these various topics that we're talking about are covered. So, and in fact, what zones would you permit the short-term rentals to be in? And if they are in a residential area, then there's maybe a little more beef to the regulation. So, but I do agree with you, Paul, to summarize that. I think a combo is probably the best bet. And we seem to have some good examples out there to draw from towns within Connecticut. I don't think we have to go too far.
Well, if I may, I think that's what we need to consider. There's so many differences in the little village of Noank than there are in most of the areas in East Lyme. There was conversation about short-term rentals in New York City and brought forward. Right. I mean, those are, where those are apples and oranges, if you will. So I think we can tailor who we have here. But I did forget, I'm sorry, I'm getting older, and I started to address your comment on the assessor.
Yes,
and,
back to Diane's.
And so you read that, so I just
Yes.
thought I'd mention that when I said last time that we are required to report every year, I'm not quite sure if it's because of the rental, because I have an LLC that oversees that.
Okay.
But I do have to fill out forms on all of the rental incomes that I get. So adding a short-term rental in my particular case would be an additional item on that form. So,
I see. Okay.
and we want to make sure the town gets their fair share in taxes.
Right. This is true. This is true. So, back to some other thoughts about what you heard tonight. Ann, do you have thinking about anything that you heard tonight that you'd like to share?
I thought it was interesting that the attorney didn't see investor-owned short-term rentals as businesses. I think a lot of towns do see them as businesses, but just overall, I'm kind of on the same track. I agree there are certain things that could be taken care of through a citywide ordinance. I still think we need to do zoning just because different parts of town are so different. Like Pine Grove does not want them. other places do want them. I think we need to look at where they fit in what zone in town. And then, once that's determined, I actually think this letter by, is it Steve Moore?
Yes.
I think he had some good suggestions as far as permitting.
Yes.
When it's decided what, if we do go through zoning, what zones are appropriate, then look at how to permit and inspect and go down from there.
Right, right. And a good point to make, for example, the gentleman from Pine Grove referenced basically the deed restriction, or perhaps covenant running with the land. And then you have other communities, being Black Point, where they are allowed. So, I mean, again, using just an ordinance is not going to.
I don't think
cut
one
it.
size fits all
Yeah.
for East Lyme.
So I think that was very interesting tonight. I was glad to have some representation from Pine Grove this evening. That was very helpful to, for us. Gary, do you have anything from tonight's bearing that would bear on your decision making?
I think the main thing that strikes me is that Attorney Londrigan gave a very nice presentation, told us basically whatever we do, there's going to be lawsuits. So we really shouldn't be making decisions out of fear of lawsuits, because these lawsuits they resolve problems. So we're not an issue with that. One thing Attorney Londrigan did not do, he did not address the fact that, according to our the zoning official, that short-term rentals are not permitted in East Lyme.
I'm going to give you this, Gary.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
So he didn't talk about that fact. And I think that's a problem. Tonight, I did not hear a compelling reason why the town of East Lyme should change our laws to allow short-term rentals. It was just silent. I didn't hear any reason. They probably exist, but I didn't hear them tonight. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thanks. Gary, do you have anything that struck you from the comments that we heard?
I'm still agnostic on ordinance versus regulation, but I'm getting more and more confused about my agnosticism. It seems to me that an ordinance protects the town from a potential lawsuit for being not uniform from one part of the city to one part of the town to the other. I also think that it would give an ordinance wouldn't allow everybody to know this is how things are conducted in the town. But I'm getting more and more educated on zoning and regulations and specifics in there. So I think that the committee probably needs to delve into that and really ferret out the issues of that and come to some consensus on our board about, is it pure ordinance, is it pure regulation, do we do nothing, or is it some combination of both?
If I may,
Yes, go ahead.
my reading has suggested that every regulation that's been put out there, suggested by towns across the country, almost every one of them has been responded with by a lawsuit. Even things as simple as registrations have been subject to lawsuits. Permit fees. Some towns have, here's a $10,000 permit fee. Clearly unreasonable, and it deserves a lawsuit. But even small registration fees have been brought to court. So the more regulation, the more problems that someone's going to have. Attorney Londrigan said it himself. So I don't know, just so you know, there's lawsuits about every issue.
Mhm.
Caps have many lawsuits. Number of days. I didn't see any on occupancy.
Well, go ahead.
Just as a follow-up to what was just said, if I'm correct and the zoning commission, the zoning regulations are silent on long-term rentals, then they would consider in these interpretation of the zoning regulations being a permissive document, that they would be also considered illegal in the town. So I would like to ask the chair if we could perhaps ask Mr. Mulholland for his opinion on that. I know we have a learned zoning commission chairman here.
I'd be happy to
Maybe
look-
she knows
I'd
that.
be happy
Yeah,
to
that's
look
great.
into that.
Yeah,
That's great.
but, you know, because I don't want to be saying that if I'm incorrect, if I miss something, and I don't want to say that, but, and I think you're right, that people will sue over anything that was mentioned before, and, you know, that's not a reason to act or not to act, so. It's a reason.
If I may respond to that, preventing people from doing long-term rental is substantially different than preventing people from doing owners from doing short-term rental, because the courts have said constitutional rights of owning property. You can own the property and live in it, you can sell it, and you can rent it. So if you remove one of those rights, and if you remove the right to rent it, then that's a clear constitutional violation. The distinction is, do we have a constitutional right to rent property for less than, or for something that's considered short-term rental?
That's
no
the
idea.
subject of the Supreme Court's conversation. So
Right.
I think they'll give us their opinion, whether we agree with that or not. But if you have the right to rent, in my view, the right to rent is the right to rent. And it could be for a minute or a year, or 3 days or a month, or, you know, I mean, I think, and that's what the issue at the Supreme Court is, which makes our job a little bit more difficult or drawn out, because we're gonna have to wait.
Right.
Well, actually, the Board of Selectmen's job, because they're gonna do the, you know, the hammer on this, or whatever they decide to do, but it's just our recommendation. But, you know, for us to go through the motions and then have the Supreme Court say, this is what's gonna happen, could change some of the thinking of what we're pushing forward, you know? Or we push forward in spite of the Supreme Court. I don't know. I guess that's up to the.
Yeah, I think last week we talked about, kind of had a general consensus that we felt we could make recommendations pending that Supreme Court decision, that we've come this far, analyzed the problem, you know, relatively well, and have some suggestions. So I think, and also because we don't know when that decision is coming forward. It seems like it may happen this spring, this summer, it could happen in the fall. So,
I think oral arguments are in February, so June, yeah.
it's possible.
knows?
Yes, it's possible, if they're on that docket, you know.
Several months out.
Right, it could take a while. There was to progress our dialogue about where we're going with all this, there was an email from Sue Spang, and I don't know if you all received that today,
Yes.
and were able to take a look at that. And Sue had previously spoken at a public hearing. She could not make tonight's public hearing, but kind of summarized her thoughts, and she does own a short-term rental. And she pointed out a couple of things. She said she's looked at our webpage, but she doesn't see a definition of our short-term rental. I mean, we haven't come up with our own definition for purposes of the report to the Board of Selectmen, but we have been working with a 30-day time frame, I believe. I think which we've seen repeatedly in examples of zoning, ordinance, literature, where we're talking about a rental somewhere under 30 days. I mean, it's kind of generic broad at this point, because we have that looming Supreme Court decision, which got into the whole thing of the temporal restrictions not making any sense. So, but I think we have defined that relatively well on this board. So I just wanted to answer that. And then she also questioned about the number of short-term rentals in East Lyme. And Greg, I know you've taken a look at Airbnb. I took a look more recently at Airbnb, and of course, when you first put in your search, there like 1,000 rentals come up for East Lyme, so you have to kind of filter through. So it's kind of like shopping on Amazon, where you put in for A and B and C also show up. So there were rentals for Old Lyme in there, and et cetera, et cetera. So, Greg, could you elaborate when you did do your search, what you did find, and where was that in time? Was that a month ago, 2 weeks ago?
Actually, thank you. It was last September.
Okay.
So it was quite some time ago, and I'm sure it's changed. But you're right. When you go on Airbnb or VRBO, you have to be careful. Otherwise, you end up with rentals in Waterford and Salem and
Right.
all over the place. But as best I could narrow it down at that time,
Okay.
and I looked at Airbnb and VRBO,
Okay.
and it was, while they weren't the same, they were remarkably close.
Really?
At about
Okay.
175.
Okay.
Each?
Yeah.
And
So three.
correct me if I'm wrong.
No,
but
no, no. The same 175
I see.
I see.
were on both sides.
Interesting. Okay. So, and Verbo is directed more for those rentals of the total house. Is that what they tend to? It's like you're not sharing that house with anyone else. That's the whole idea there. But basically, you looked at those two things. So we're in the neighborhood of 200.
And I
Yes, go
think
ahead.
the gentleman had a good point. I know a couple owners that once someone rents, they just deal with each other privately and don't go through Airbnb
Right.
for future bookings. So there's probably a few more than that.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for bringing that up, because that, I think, is definitely the case. Not everyone is, especially some traditional rentals that have been in service, if you will, in beach communities or elsewhere in town. I mean, if they go back a lot of years, they don't need to be using Airbnb, perhaps. Okay. And then Sue Spang felt that we haven't really quantified, the effects of short-term rentals. She was all on the positive side of things, being, I guess, also from her perspective, being an owner. But I think in our first hearing, and somewhat to some extent this hearing today, and in other public delegations, we've certainly heard enough negative information, and we've certainly read about enough negative information. So, and I think, Gary, you summarized, to a great extent, many of the comments. For purposes of a report that we were to do, it's going to be tedious, but I still think it might be good to, I started a little topics here for a spreadsheet, to just have, the person's name, address, and the basic, yay, a for, against, or some sort of a, wants regulation, doesn't want regulation, just so that we have that on the record somewhere. But we can talk more about that as we get closer to writing an actual report. But I think that would be helpful. But I just wanted to address a couple of those concerns. I thought it was good that Sue shared her experiences, but I just felt as though I didn't agree with her on her conclusions about information that we've gathered, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is, where to go from here? So we have our list of suggested regulation. This is the original list, and this was on the web page. We also have our goals. Dan Beachy couldn't be here tonight, but he was really making some very good points last meeting about goals and we've gone through these, and if there's any other goal that you'd like to articulate or you'd like to change in terms of re-articulating it, speak up about it. I think we covered quite a few of these. And so, I think for me, an overall goal is really this. Actually, Sue Spang mentioned something in her letter about the character of neighborhoods, and we really we're not concerned so much about the character of neighborhoods. We're concerned about retaining the community aspect of neighborhoods, where that may not be happening if there's a proliferation of short-term rentals. So that seems to be a concern. That I think I have, and I would like to hear anyone else on that point, on that particular goal of being concerned about that from a policy-making standpoint or a recommendation standpoint. John, go ahead.
What's that?
Yeah, go ahead if you have a thought about that.
I think some of the, sitting here for the last number of months and going through this, there's clearly, a bunch of issues. I think they're far bigger than this committee can, really deal with. And there's a lot of constitutional issues, which we're going to be saying before, but listening to the attorneys, they have different opinions on it. But one of the big issues, clearly, and I thought Sue Sprang's letter was very well done. But no matter what we do, and I happen to, understand both the zoning side of it and the ordinance side, but the biggest issue, I think, is whatever we do, what's the enforceability of it really, and how do you enforce it? And I think that is, it's similar to our blight, rules. We're at Black Point, we're talking about, talking about property maintenance and stuff like that, and getting into, relative and following look what the town is doing in blight. But the whole question comes up again, enforceability. And I think that's one thing that, that's kind of concerning. And whatever we do, and clearly people are entitled to their rights to rent, rent this. And it seems to be the overriding theme here. And then the question is the timing of it. And I'm not so sure the Supreme Court case is directly related to that. It seems that that's talking more, that I understand it, more about pre-existing rules versus post-existing rules. So I'm not so sure it's going to be exactly on point that we think it is. It seems to be that when we've asked the attorneys to speak on that, they've given us, two, different, slightly different analysis of that. So I'm not so sure which it really is. And the other concern it would be you've got real estate, real estate signage. You put a house for rent, seasonally, occasionally, or a house for sale or whatever. And some towns have, signage ordinances that affect that and the size of it, etc. I've not seen this personally, but what stops in, Airbnb or VRBO putting a sign out there and putting lights on it, etc. So, again, that's, just probably an overreach, but that is something that, as you got 200 now, when you have 400, now you can get more competition. And so I think that that's, another consideration. I think the idea of the community, that's like any community. Communities change over time, but this is America, and I think that, that people are entitled, to their rights as property owners. So, to say that we're, I'm here, it's okay, I don't want anybody else here either for any other purpose. And this is obviously that's what zoning comes into play, as Paul was saying. So I think there is a tie-in between zoning, especially for the long-term goals as you were discussing, community goals. So I think I firmly think that the registration is not really a great overreach. I think that I do feel that people, if they are running it, as a full, as a full Airbnb, that they should be filing annual, returns like we do in other like an Airbnb, like a bed and breakfast would have to do, or any other business. So I do see that, but I mean, and that should be consideration in the assessment. So as in addition to the personal property, but I think that the it is a very, very difficult situation. I know we have one community clearly where it is a problem currently, and I think that the parking issues that they've talked about and the parking restrictions, through the police commissions, make a lot of, make some sense. I think that it ties into this noise ordinances. I thought some of the comments that people made are extremely well, on both sides of this. So I think it is a hot potato issue, and one that we have to, walk very slowly and carefully with. And I think any recommendation should have to take everybody's considerations and, into play. And yeah, we can't be afraid of lawsuits, and lawsuits are not inexpensive for either party. So, but we have to talk about practicality, and so I think, you have to start somewhere, and I think Greg's idea of at least the registration, start somewhere. But that's just, so that's my, listening to all of this and listening to people on both sides, that it's something that you want to, there's a lot of pluses and minuses to it. But, and again, it's I feel for, people that have negative experiences with it, but we've also heard of a lot of people who have very positive experiences too. So it's hard to make, one rule to solve one, potential problem. We have to look at, the whole, look at the entire town as a whole. So, but I think we have to be respectful to that and see what, and I think the landlords and owners have an awful lot to do with this themselves and how they run their businesses.
Definitely.
So that's just so I am totally up in the air, totally, on what exactly we should recommend or how we recommend it, frankly. But it's my own opinion.
Okay.
And I'll take a stab at answering your question.
Okay.
So your question essentially is, how do we maintain our communities? This is a relatively new issue. So what was happening before, it seems like communities were kind of just doing their thing and renting beach houses out, and it really wasn't causing a lot of trouble. It's been going on for a long time all over the world in East Lyme, and people have testified that they enjoyed them for 50 years. So what's changed, it seems as if what's changed, and what changes a lot of society, are these corporate apps that get developed. Well, they're not corporate when they get developed. These guys in garages develop apps that quickly take over the world. And that's one of them, Airbnb. So that's what's changed. And it's caused an exponential problem for communities and a lot of opportunity for owners. But that's the problem, Airbnbs. VRBO, all of these short-term rental apps. I don't have a lot of faith in these kinds of corporations that don't have any skin in the game. They don't have millions of employees. They don't have factories. They don't contribute to the communities. They just extract money with a click of a button. So I don't have a lot of faith in these kinds of companies who think that they're actually helping our communities. I think the local communities have to say, we live here, and it's our responsibility. So to answer your question, how I've looked at this, it's the proliferation of apps. And I think people put too much trust in these companies to do the right thing. That's my stab at answering your question.
That's helpful. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. So I guess I'd still like to stay within our list of 1 to 10. I think we can start, if we did agree last week, and I'll just double check with everyone, that we're happy, or we're okay, I should say, with coming up with some pretty detailed recommendations, even though we know the Connecticut Supreme Court is yet to rule in the Libby case. So do we all still feel that way and just want to take a pulse again here? That's okay. That, you know, we're in it and we're gonna get to a finish line. Okay.
Right.
I thought we decided that we were not gonna not do nothing,
Correct.
and that we were not going to
Ban. Yes,
ban
that's
short-term rentals.
correct. So that's also correct. So, yes, I was about to get to those as well. But,
Okay, I'm
but
sorry.
that's
I missed
okay.
it.
No,
I
but
thought you were talking about that
no,
when you
but
said the detail.
that's my next point. But you're correct there. But first point, yeah, I think we agree that we don't have to pause our mission because of the Supreme Court pending, the Supreme Court decision that's pending. So that's one thing. And the second thing was, yes, if you look at the two extremes of not doing anything versus banning, and it seemed as though from our last meeting, we were somewhere in the middle of wanting some reasonable regulation. And yes, it even appeared in the newspaper that way, I must say. So that was good. So I think there is consensus on that, and that's good. And just a point about consensus, we may, within our, 10 or 8 to 10, areas of regulation or suggestions or whatever, we may not all agree or even be able to reach a consensus on one thing or another. And when we do a report, it's fine if there's, 3 people suggesting this and 5 people suggesting that. That's okay. The point is that we've turned the rock over and are trying to look for some solutions, and this is not easy, for sure. But I think staying within what we've suggested here, and then I still think we need Paul's question about long-term rentals answered. And then I definitely think we need some definitive information on pre-existing use, because different places have handled it differently. Noank certainly handled it very efficiently and kind of rules out the pre-existing conditions. But if you look at the regulations they proposed, it did make sense. So I'd like to know, going through a set of zoning amendments, what is the story with that? And what would be a legal opinion on that? So those are things I think we need the answers on.
I can look into that.
Okay, that would be great, and Attorney Zamarka will of course elaborate there too. Thanks, Ann. So I'm thinking for some of the things that we were all assigned previously, and now your argument is kind of not.
Don't say move.
It's not. I actually did. I talked about moot court last time when you weren't here.
I will be writing a dissenting opinion. I'm gonna give it to Paul.
Okay. Well, we can still.
So one question with regard to Noank.
Yes.
I just pulled them up. Noank is a village in the town of Groton.
Yes, correct.
So Niantic is a village in the town of East Lyme. Flanders is a village in the town of East Lyme. Comparing townwide ordinances with a village decision in another town, I just think that should be on the table, because it's kind of a different thing. We have our own zoning in Giant's Neck. I think
Yes.
Black Point has it, and is Pine Grove the other one?
Crescent Beach.
Crescent Beach is the other one.
Correct.
So I think the decision in Noank would be the same as Giant's Neck Beach or Crescent Beach
Correct.
making a decision.
Yes.
And so I think what we have to ask ourselves is, how does this solve the problem that we're having? And the problem is not finding, most of the time, 99% of the time, people who respect and enjoy short-term rentals. In fact, the woman that talked about the Coast Guard allowing community support for
great
people
idea. Yes.
to come in for the weekend and go to their family weekends or whatever. That's a short-term rental. That's most of probably where a lot of the short-term rentals come from. So I think we have to decide, does it solve the problem of that ordinances are already on the books to solve? Noise, parking. And if those went away, to your point, what changed? You blamed it on apps, but really what changed is the proliferation of party houses.
Because of that.
And Airbnb has changed their philosophy on how to move forward, I think, as a result of the bad press that they were getting. I think VRBO treats it a lot, or has treated in the past differently than Airbnb has, by qualifying and by making sure that there's investigations on people, both who rent and who provide the rent. So I think we have to ask that. And some of the things that we're talking about, I don't think are going to solve that problem. You know, Greg is here because of the problems in his community.
Right.
So are these things going to solve that without action on ordinances that already exist?
Right. Well, a definite chunk of what we would recommend would be anything that we have in terms of, tools in the toolbox already, being whether they're ordinances that we have or regulations or anything else that we have, the whole, police commission, helping us out with some parking issues. Those are definitely, to me, part and parcel of what we can recommend. Absolutely. That's almost your starting place. What do we already have? That's helpful. So back to, we've kind of come full circle, but when Greg's point initially, yeah, definitely look at, I had outlined those 2 ordinances also. So I think that's a starting place where we can be comfortable about utilize those and what is deficient in them. How could we do this better? Do you need more staff? Do you need to change the ordinance in question? Do you need to get your communities to come before the police commission? And also the general point that if you are empowered, as a special community with its own zoning, are you doing that sufficiently yourself? Because we can't solve all your problems. So that's a whole big. That would be one good paragraph in the report, right? My point is that I think we're at a point where we can start fleshing out the suggestions, like take it up a step. So Greg and Gary had some suggestions. So now I think take what you suggested and then maybe say, okay, I prefer the way Simsbury has done this, and what in particular. Not that you're going to draft the whole regulation, because that's beyond the scope of this, of our work, but you can at least pinpoint those areas of regulation or things like occupancy that you talked about. And if you think those are helpful, then I think, start narrowing the world. You're good putting a little meat on the bones, but you're narrowing some of the possibilities from your outline. I think that would be really helpful. And similarly, maybe Paul, with your suggestion, and John's about, short-term rentals, filling out the appropriate paperwork with the assessor's office, having those income statements. And then maybe having a little conversation with Diane about this memo, because this was very, I would like to hear her thoughts about commercial enterprises, and we certainly heard the opposite opinion this evening. And for myself, with the 2 ordinances, I can suggest in more detail what would be ways to make those more usable and help to solve some of the problems. And for your memo, next step up, your memo about the caps, and then you concluded that you thought narrowing the world with zoning and hitting certain zoning districts. So maybe take a look at something. You could look at the Simsbury, whatever. So whatever example you want to pull from. Excuse me, because
I thought lotteries were a bad idea.
Yes.
I thought we could throw those out.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, lotteries were an interesting concept, and I could see where if you had, total pandemonium already, that, just throw that in there, and I guess it does, simplify things. But that, yeah, I think we can, but I think, yeah, the zoning districts, and that's something that you see repeatedly, and Paul pointed out about bed and breakfast. And then Montville, for example, I think they're not doing anything, but they kind of massage or I haven't taken a look at their bed and breakfast zoning, but they seem to, under that heading of bed and breakfast, also come short-term rentals.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, so maybe we ought to take a look at that, because we do, I mean, I find our bed and breakfast zoning very interesting, because it comes close to being a short-term rental, but it's not quite. So, that's an interesting thing. So I think what I'm asking is, we meet again very soon, but that we start, making some decisions, as now that we've heard more, we've read more, and we start making some decisions, in the areas that we have researched ourselves. And, if you had to write a report to the Board of Selectmen, and this is your section of the report to write, what would you do? That's what I think we're at that point of feeling fairly comfortable, again, not knowing what Connecticut Supreme Court's gonna do, and not knowing the answer to our legal questions, yours and the other question about pre-existing uses.
Non-conforming uses.
And non-conforming, yes, thank you, non-conforming uses. So I think that will move the ball forward for us. Does that make sense? Does anyone else have another approach to this? I'm just trying to, I know it's very difficult. Because the information is vast. But we do have some good examples, to draw upon. So I think, there's a lot of ways we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because we have things on the books that can help. And then we have the example of other communities. It's not gonna be, it's apples and oranges, yes, but, if you start drawing from these examples, you can see what works. And take a look at this whole thing about the ordinance versus zoning, because when I looked back at just want to mention this, because I think it's very important. I looked back at that Southeast Connecticut chart, and I looked at the different towns, and where there is an ordinance and not zoning, first of all, it was infrequent, but where there was, and again, when you went to look at that town's ordinance, it was backed up by a zoning regulation that permitted the STRs. So that to me was pretty interesting. I didn't check everything, but certainly the case of Simsbury, I don't know where else, but.
I think Ledyard Ledyard passed an ordinance that sunsetted after 2 years.
Okay.
And at that time, then, there were zoning regulations that came in.
Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting.
If
So
they did
putting, yes, they did both, but they had that is very interesting. Okay.
Here it is.
Yes, okay, very good.
Were they the ones that changed it due to public pressure, or was that another committee?
I don't know what
Yeah,
happened
what,
there.
yeah, I hadn't heard the public pressure thing with respect to them, but.
There was Preston, though. I
Preston,
think Preston
right.
was the one that,
And Stonington, yeah, did not work out.
Stonington just voted it down.
It was a
What you
vote.
said.
It was a vote. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting when I did speak to the attorney from Noank that they had crafted all these regulations, and then people came forth and said, we really, we're okay with short-term rentals, but we want them more than 30 days. So again, that's a good example of what might be unique to that community that doesn't work for another community.
One of the largest oyster businesses is in Noank.
So, okay, so I think if we can just refine our thoughts more, then that would be kind of like the very, very first draft of what would be a report, like with each of the topics that we've covered. And I think you should still pursue your topic again, because, we still are addressing, doing nothing, banning, and the regulation in between. So, if either the doing nothing or the banning, you know, we'll have to address in a report. Why is it that we did,
Right.
that we did not do either of those things?
Definitely. Right.
So, and I think you've talked about the due diligence that we need to have on that topic, so I agree with you. Okay, so question, okay, so let's move on to, when our next meeting would be. How much time do we need to start to really, put things in presentation form? Again, this is a draft of what you're doing, but it would form the basis of a report.
I'm free tomorrow.
You gonna work all night?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
It's like a college paper. Okay, today's the 29th. Let's see. Okay, we know that President's Day is a holiday, but we can meet sooner. I mean, I'm thinking,
What a nation's presidents.
yes, that President's Day is the 19th. Mondays work for us. Do you think next week is too soon?
To me?
Yes. Or do you think the 12th is okay? Give yourself a little time. I mean, I'm open either, you know, either
Is
way.
there a rush for this? And what's wrong with March?
Well, I'm thinking
I think the 12th is a good
the
day.
12th is good. Yeah, I think the 12th would work. Try to, I think, move this forward because I think we can.
So another option here is to basically make some poor soul the secretary, and everybody can send their sections to that person who can try to assemble.
Well, we could do that. We could.
Somebody's not here. Usually when you're not here, you got to point at somebody.
Yeah, that would be Dan.
My name's Dan.
Yeah, right now.
Yeah, Dan.
Oh, I know we are. Yeah, we're getting loopy. Okay.
Well, but instead of everybody bringing their sections to the next, you know, we could in theory say, okay, let's everybody try to get their section to Brooke by what's today?
Okay.
Okay, like next Monday or Tuesday, and ask Brooke to send it out to everybody.
Before
and
the
then when
12th.
we came to the meeting on the 12th,
Yes.
we would have seen it,
Yes.
and we would
absolutely.
have reasonable comments instead of like off the cuff comments.
Yes, absolutely. No, I think that makes total sense.
Can we do that based on the attorney's interpretation of collective meeting by email?
So if
I'm not
if these are drafts and you label your work product as a draft, yes, we can
do
circulate
that?
We can circulate, and we won't be in violation of FOIA.
Well, we're not gonna circulate it for editing, we're just gonna send it back out after
Correct.
it's been compiled.
Yeah, but even that,
So we can see
right?
it, so that when we come to the meeting, then we can
Yeah.
try to edit or change.
I just want to.
Yeah.
That's.
But
yeah.
but still label it, you know, draft, whatever your document that you're putting together.
Just send it to Brooke?
Yeah.
And forward to Brooke when you
Okay.
have it, and then she can circulate those. But circulating as drafts that to each other, you know, is not anything. That's okay. That's fine. And we've been very good where I haven't circulated anything and Brooke has. So that's been.
So can we
Interesting,
decide
but-
on the 12th?
Yeah, I think the 12th works. Okay.
That's not the holidays.
And it's not the holiday, the 19th is. And I think from there, we could think about, you know, that those things, as I said, will serve as the basis for a report. And then meanwhile, we can get some thought on those legal questions from Zamarka. I mean, I can
I'll
talk to you
ask
about
tomorrow.
that. Yes, that's great. Okay, thanks. So with that, and, you know, we're still looking at, you know, early March for a report. I mean, perhaps, or it might be later in March, because the 6th will be the first Board of Selectmen meeting, or the 20th. So, you know, I think I'd rather get it right, you know, than not here. And I'm not trying to hurry and report to Board of Selectmen, but I think based on a lot of the stuff that we have already, we can do this. Okay, on the agenda, reports of co-chairs. Gary, do you have anything
No.
to report otherwise?
Why do you
Okay.
smile?
Okay, the only thing I have to report is tomorrow there is a webinar at 2 p.m. That Granicus, and we've used their documents so far, they're putting together about updating, you know, this on short-term rentals. I don't know the focus of it, but I'm going to attend that webinar, and then it will be posted on their website very soon, I think, thereafter. So that's something I'll share with everyone. I tried to get all of us access so that you could just do this yourselves, but that just didn't work out. So I'll be the attendee, and then we'll circulate, and I'll take some notes too. And that's all I have. Any final comments by anyone?
Yeah, I would like to make just a few comments.
Okay, sure.
It's always interesting how a commission or any organization kind of ebbs and flows. It tries to move forward and backward. And I think you learn as you go along. One of the things that I think I've learned, and really just in the last couple of meetings, is I think one of my goals, and I think maybe one of our goals, should be that we establish equity across all the rentals, so that long-term rentals aren't being penalized when short-term rentals don't have to do something, and vice versa, and you know, that there be some basic fairness across all of the rentals that we have going on in East Lyme. You know, the second thing, and I've been from day one, I've always said I want a permit registration system. Airbnb recommends that. You talk about Sue Spang's letter saying we haven't established the size of the problem. It becomes a catch-22 if you don't put a registration system in, then you can never establish the size of the problem. So I think that's kind of a minimum that we have to do. I do think, based on the discussion tonight, that we do that as an ordinance, but then within the individual zoning districts, if you want to permit or not permit bed and breakfast, then that's as land use should be by the zoning commission. The ordinance is not telling people they can or can't, it's just we need a permit, like any other money-making operation in town. So I'm okay with, you know, the combination of zoning and an ordinance, and I fully agree that we have tools at hand to take care of parking, noise. I'm not even concerned about occupancy at this point, but I mean, down the road we could talk about that, either in the part of the zoning for the individual towns, or as part of the ordinance, although it would not seem to fit in the ordinance. But nonetheless, I think those are interesting high points that I think I've come to. I'm always late to the party, but this is you know, where I am now, and I think I agree that it's time to start writing this up together and get our ideas together, and get this going.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, great. And I see Candace and our ex officio. Thanks for attending tonight. Did you want to say anything, Candace? Any thoughts? Come on up.
Thank you for having me. I think you guys are doing a great job kind of differentiating all the information and kind of trying to come to the best fit for East Lyme. One of the things that I haven't heard mentioned, and I did want to mention it, is what about boarding homes? What about people that rent out their rooms? Is that something that needs to be looked at as well, since you're looking at everything? And as you're talking, it keeps popping up, and I do think that it should be added in, because I do think more and more people are renting out rooms. So maybe that's something that can be added in or looked at as well. What's that?
That's how it all started.
That's how
That's how Airbnb all started.
I like some of, when you're looking at different towns and what they're doing, more shoreline towns, right? Because I think that people are making really good comments in regards to the revenue that it also brings in as well, right? Because when people come into town, what do? They're coming for vacation. They want to walk the town. They want to go and shop in our little shops that are lining Main Street. They want to go to the events. So there's money coming into our town from the short-term rentals as well, right? So going back and forth, and I want to limit my comments because at some point it's going to come to me, right? But I mean, I think that you're doing a great job looking through everything and really being thorough. But, you know, ordinance versus regulation, and of course, Supreme Court and what they're doing. I don't think that people should be hindered by the possibility of being sued. However, I do think that it's important to be cognizant of what you're doing, because you don't want to set the town up for a lawsuit, just because, you know, maybe somebody wants to do something. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks. Well,
Thank you.
thanks, Candace. Thanks for attending. Okay, so with that, I think we're set. And
So can I summarize
Yes.
real briefly? We're gonna try to generate written sections that correspond to what we did previously
yes, I think so. I
To-
think at
to
this
Brooke.
point, yes.
as soon as we can,
Yeah,
or
and-
by middle of next week, or
Yeah,
whatever happens first.
This would be your first draft of
Right.
writing that section of the report, let's say.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Perfect, yeah. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but, yeah, we're not editing at this point, but just getting it in prose form, for me, definitely out of outline form, you know, for sure, would be very helpful.
Okay.
So this is like, you know, part 2 of our phase 2 now for us. Okay, that's great.
Did
All right.
did we want to be limited to that, or if there are other views on others? Number
Well,
6.
well,
Could
for
you put
sure.
a statement regarding that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, you could just, you know, clarify what section you're
Yeah.
referring to, but sure, if you have a thought about another section and you just want to articulate that, absolutely, yeah. Like I said, I think we're gonna reach consensus on a lot of things, but there may be a few areas that we don't, so that's fine. And this may be information that you're still going to pass on to Board of Selectmen, because those are 6 different people than us, and they will, you know, be analyzing in a different way. Okay, so with that, I think we're set, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, and seconded? Okay, Paul, thank you, and I say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys.